Hi everyone, I'm Abigail. This is Bella, and welcome to another Two Kids Interview. Today we are joined by New York Times bestselling author Tessa Gratton. Ms. Gratton has written mostly young adult novels, has been part of a lot of anthologies, and written a number of Star Wars, The High Republic books, including New York Times bestseller Quest for Planet. And in March 2024, Miss Gratton has another Star Wars book coming out, Defy the Storm. And then in May 2024, a new young adult fantasy, Blood and Fury. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Most of your books are young adult. Why is that the age group you like to write for?
I started writing for young adult when I first decided that I wanted to be a published author because I was about 24 years old, and I had been in college and graduate school and intended to go into politics because I wanted to work to make the world better, but I was having a really hard time finding exactly what I wanted to do. And I thought really hard about what made me think that I understood the world and what made me question the world and want it to be a better place. And I realized that other than, the way that my parents taught me to think, it was the books that I read when I was like 12 to 17, that when I was a teenager and a young adult, I was really forming the way that I wanted to interact with the world and who I wanted to be. And so I wanted to write books for kids like me and ask questions about the world and, have good adventures that, were about heroes and hard choices and growing up.
You have been a part of a lot of anthologies. What do you enjoy about being a part of that type of book?
Oh, writing short stories is very different from writing novels because they're so short. And so you get to, comes with a different set of challenges. Like when you have a novel, you've got a lot of space to develop the whole world and different characters and really dig into conflicts and the adventures. But with a short story, you really only have a few pages. So you have to be really focused. And I enjoy the challenge of writing something that's really short, but also can have an impact on readers, like whether they just have a really good time in those 10 pages, or I write about something that, in just an hour can make them rethink something. And with anthologies, there's usually a theme. And so that gives me a nice target, I guess. Like if I'm in a vampire anthology, I know that my short story has to be about vampires. Or if it's a Star Wars anthology, it has to be about Star Wars issues like the Jedi and things like that. So
A huge fan base. Is there extra pressure in reading a Star Wars novel?
there is extra pressure with that. I have been writing books and publishing books since 2011 is when my first novel came out. But my first Star Wars book just came out last year. And, I have pretty consistently had books published, but not with anywhere close to the readership of Star Wars. And people care about Star Wars in this huge way. And even though with the High Republic, because it takes place several hundred years before any of the movies or TV shows. So there aren't a lot of characters that people are specifically invested in, but people are still really excited about the Jedi, and like Master Yoda is in these books. So I've gotten to write about Yoda, and that's really stressful, but fun too, because he's such a fun little trickster character. So I will say the readership for Star Wars has been very welcoming. The whole fandom is excited about books, and they don't tend to be as interested in arguing as some of the movie fandom side. So that's nice. That was a relief.
Who is your favorite Star Wars character?
Oh, my favorite Star Wars character has to be Princess Leia. When I was really little and The Return of the Jedi came out, I was about 4. And I remember being obsessed with the Ewoks because they were like little teddy bears that fought. And so I really liked Wicket initially, but he was really good friends with Princess Leia. And as I got older, I got really interested in her because she has so many different aspects to her character. She's a rebel and a general and a princess and a politician, and she's just really good at so many things. And plus, she's funny. And I really like that she has a really sharp sense of humor and is good at everything. And I admire that a lot about Princess Leia. And her actor, Carrie Fisher, was also a really interesting and admirable person who did a lot of writing about her life and her struggles with mental health and what it's like to grow up in Hollywood. And I really admired her as a person too.
Can you tell us about a time when you were doing something and noticed someone or something and you thought, I need to put that in a book?
Oh gosh. Let's see. Oh, this is a little bit hard. Partly because I mostly write like space operas and fantasy. And so I frequently forget when I'm interacting with people that, it's real people are what I'm trying to put into these stories. But my dad is an emergency room doctor, and he likes to tell gruesome stories at the dinner table, like describe, like, oh, this is the grossest thing that happened. And so I've put a lot of details about that in some of my books, not the Star Wars books. We don't get very graphic with the violence in Star Wars, but some of my older books and the adult books, I've had a lot of fun putting interesting like field medicine into my books. And my dad really likes it when I call him and I say, Dad, if a giant troll flung you down, could it relocate your dislocated shoulder? And then he'll, give me a really good, fun answer to how I can deal with that in a fantasy novel.
What is your process when putting a book together? Do you decide the end before the middle, or do you put it together in order?
Ooh, it's different with different books. When it's just a Tessa book, then I tend to be much more fluid about how I think about the shape of the book. Like I usually am thinking about a character and a conflict, or like the dark night of the soul is something we call what a character goes through when they're having like the really hardest moment of the story, and then an epiphany in order to decide how they want to deal with the climactic tension or battle. And that's my favorite thing to start with when I'm thinking about a book. And so I'll kind of go in both directions from there, from that moment, like go toward what I think the ending point needs to be and back toward where the beginning needs to be. But before I actually start writing chapter 1, I do need to know what the ending is that I'm driving toward. But when I have a Star Wars book, it's very different because those are written in collaboration. I don't get to make up everything that I want to make up. They frequently come with a few plot points already because I'm hired to write the Star Wars books. And so they know, okay, this book is going to be about, for example, a quest for Planet X. I knew going in that that book needed to be about the characters trying to find their way to this planet. And so it needed to be sort of like a treasure hunt and a race. And I knew, because of the nature of the project, whether they were going to get there or not and why. And so those I tend to write in order because I have to turn in an outline and get that approved by the editors and the other people that I'm working with, since we're trying to tell such a big story and my book affects the other authors' books and what's going on across the galaxy.
You have written with Justina Ireland. How does your process change when writing with someone else?
Well, we have a lot of fun initially. I usually write by myself, and I sit with my notebook and I scrawl out ideas and let something really cook for a long time. But when I write with Justina, we try to get together in person. Like we have a weekend together and we just like come up with all of the most fun, wild ideas we can. And so it tends to be a faster and more dynamic and fun process. And then at that point, we take turns making an outline and trying to decide the best things that can happen and who can come up with the neatest twist. And then we trade the book back and forth. So like I'll write a chapter and send it to her and she'll write a chapter, and we get to surprise each other and have a lot of fun doing that. So it is definitely both easier and more fun to co-write with Justina. We're really good friends. So we think we have opinions in the same direction about a lot of things.
Writing isn't easy, and rejection seems to be a part of most writers' stories. Can you tell us about that part of your journey?
I can. As I was saying earlier, I decided that I wanted to be an author when I was about 24. And I gave myself 5 years to focus on that. So I just got a job that was going to pay the bills, and it didn't ask a lot of me, so that all of my creative space could be going toward writing and working. And I wrote a book and decided it wasn't good enough. And so I wrote another book and I revised that book and I decided it wasn't good enough. So I wrote a third book. And at this point, I was just self-rejecting, which is also something that a lot of writers do. And this third book I revised and I asked for feedback from some of my friends and I revised it again. And I sent it out to about 12 agents. And even though some of the agents were really excited about it, none of them wanted to represent the book. And so an agent is the person that will actually try and sell a book for a writer and like take it to editors. They're the people who know the best place for a book. And so you really need an agent if you want to be published traditionally. And so instead of sending it out to more agents, I decided to scrap that book and write another book. And once I had revised that one, I sent it out to about 12 agents again. And again, some of them were really excited, but nobody ended up wanting to represent it. And it would have been about 4 years at this point, and I was getting like, at the end of my deadline, and I was going to have to go back to school and find a different career. And I wrote one more book, and this one I felt really good about. And I just felt like it was the right book with the right time. And I sent it to one agent, and that agent, she called me on the phone and she said, I love this book. I really want to represent it, but there's just one thing. Can we change the title? I want to call it Blood Magic. And I said, you can call it whatever you want if you are going to sell it. And so she did. And that was my first novel. So it took me about 5 years of both self-rejection and the regular kinds of rejection. It took us about 8 or 9 months to sell it. A lot of editors read it and just didn't think it was right for them. And then once I did sell that, it felt great and it went really well and I had a good time. But, every time you have a new book, you have to sell that book. And so the writing career, the rejection never stops coming, not just from like readers who give your book 1 star and they tell you how much they didn't like it, to editors rejecting your 4th book or your 7th book. I just sold an adult project and it took me almost 3 years to sell it. So it was a lot of rejection again. And, meanwhile, I was working for Star Wars, so I was doing other things, but it's just part of the process of being in publishing. It's worth it, though. Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you enjoy writing good guys or bad guys more?
Ooh, ultimately, I am more satisfied by a character who chooses to do the right thing. I writing villains can be a lot of fun, and I think that the best books have really interesting antagonists and villains who are either really cool or really think they are the hero. But ultimately, I write books because I want the world to be better and I want people to make better choices. And so I like to always have at least one character who is trying their best and trying to be good, even when they make mistakes and might accidentally or unintentionally do bad things. I want the trajectory of my stories to be toward good. So good guys.
Writing a book is a big commitment. When you come up with an idea, how do you become sure that this is a story you want to tell?
Ooh, that's a great question. I sometimes have an idea and then I don't think it's viable. It's not ready to be written for years. I have waited 2 years to write a story that I really thought would be a good novel. And I've waited 10 years to write a story because it wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. It just didn't, something about it didn't feel right. And so, in a lot of ways, knowing that an idea is a book that I want to write and that I'm ready to write is just kind of a gut feeling. That is one thing that I haven't found a more like nuanced way to like, there's no checklist for me. Like it has this, it has this, it has this. I'm ready to go. This is a great idea. It's much more of an emotion for me. And so that can be really difficult sometimes, but also when I feel like a story is ready for me to write it, so far I've always finished that story. Even if it hasn't gotten published, I have finished it. Like I have come to a conclusion between myself and that story. So yeah, it's just something I know. I'm not sure I could teach that.
We have interviewed a number of authors who've had books banned in certain places. That means in those places, kids don't have the same access to books that we have and may not see themselves represented in books. Can you give us your thoughts on this?
I think that books should be widely available to everyone who wants to read them. Libraries have always served this purpose for gathering stories and knowledge. And if books are banned, like you said, kids don't have access to things they might need. And in my experience, kids are very good at not reading things that make them uncomfortable or that they're not ready for. I think kids know if they need to stop or if they have questions. And I think it's important for all books to be available and for kids to have a place and an adult they can go to that they feel safe to ask questions about and learn how to decide for themselves what they are and aren't ready to read. I mean, parents and librarians and teachers, that I have spoken to that try and do that for their kids are, all very interested in fighting book banning. Also, it's the best way for all of us to go.
Can you tell us exactly where you were and what you were doing when you found out you were a New York Times best-selling author?
I can. I was eating dinner with my wife and I was not paying attention because I really didn't think it was going to happen. And it's really hard to get on the bestseller list, especially for middle grade series that is up against some really big popular books. And so I wasn't paying attention. And all of a sudden, my phone, which was sitting a few feet away from me, started just lighting up with all these notifications. And I was worried. I was like, oh no, what's happening? Did I accidentally get in a fight with someone on Twitter and I don't notice it? I thought that it was something bad. And so I looked at my phone and I had an email from the publisher of Lucasfilm, and he's at Disney Lucasfilm, and he had emailed me to say that the Quest for Planet X hit the list, and he was so excited, and he was going to go tell everyone. And so that's what had happened is he was announcing it all over. And so it was really exciting. I got to celebrate there with my wife immediately and with the whole internet. And it was very cool.
What writer has had the most influence on you?
Ooh, when I was younger, first starting to figure out how I wanted to be a storyteller, and the kinds of things I wanted to write, which was when I was in high school. My favorite writers were Anne Rice, Michael Crichton, and Robin McKinley, and they all write about monsters. And they all do it in very different ways. Michael Crichton, who wrote Jurassic Park, writes from a very scientific place, and Anne Rice, who writes about vampires and witches, writes from a historical place. All of her books are deeply saturated with history. And then Robin McKinley writes fairy tales, and they're full of magic and coming of age. So they all are, they were telling the same kind of stories in vastly different ways. And I think that they all influenced me deeply. More recently, the authors that I have had the biggest impact on me, besides the ones that are my friends that I work with, are Karen Lord, who is a writer of science fiction, and she wrote a book called The Best of All Possible Worlds, which I think is perfect. And I've never read another book that I thought was perfect. And every time I read it, that opinion doesn't change. It only gets better. And then N.K. Jemisin, who writes fantasy and science fiction, and the way that she brings world and conflict and characters together in all of her books is something that I return to again and again, because I know I can learn from all of those books. So they're my current most influential writers. I know you asked for one and I gave you five, but
What advice do you have for young writers?
have adventures and practice. The practice is required for everything. You don't have to write on a schedule, but you do have to write some and read to learn how other people have written the kind of things you want to write. And so reading is part of writing. And then you go have adventures whenever you can, whether that is in your backyard or going on a vacation and going to new places, new towns. And when you meet new people and when you're in new places, try to understand how those places and how those people work. Yeah.
Can you tell us about a project you are working on now?
Ooh, right now I am working on two things. One of them is another Star Wars book. It is called Temptation of the Force, and it comes out in June or July. And it is one of the adult books. So it'll be my first adult Star Wars. And we're doing edits on that right now. So it's very exciting. It's the sequel to a book that comes out next week called The Eye of Darkness, written by George Mann. And then the other thing I'm working on is a short story for an online anthology.
Finally, it's time for our turbo 10. 10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Number 1, what is your favorite phrase to use?
Oh, I'm not very fast at this. I say just too much. I have to delete that from all my books. Just this, just a feeling, just that.
Number 2, what is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
Paleontology.
Number 3, what is your go-to snack food?
Ooh, persimmons right now. That's a fall fruit.
Number 4, what was your favorite book growing up?
My favorite book growing up was Beauty by Robin McKinley. It's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast.
Number 5, if you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
Ooh, I would go to Barbados and hang out with my friend Karen Lord, who wrote that great book.
Number 6, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Flying.
Number 7, what was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Number 8, what is your favorite rainy day activity?
Reading, definitely.
Number 9. If you could have any 3 dinner guests, who would they be?
Oh, 3 dinner guests, alive or dead?
It could be no rules, even a
No
fictional.
rules. William Shakespeare, Michelle Obama, Gloria Anzaldúa.
Number 10. What is the best piece of advice you were ever given?
Ooh, um, a romance writer told me once that if you are a published author long enough, all of the good things and all of the bad things will happen to you in your career. So you just have to roll with it. And that has served me really well.
You were awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for spending this time with us. We can't
You
wait
were
to read
awesome
your
too.
future books.
Thanks.